Yeah. Any questions? Mr. Watch.
California is the worst state in the union.
I can understand some of the things you're doing with regulation, tax planning, and stuff like that. But that isn't the only one. There are terrible workers' comp, everything. It runs the gamut. What is the legislature doing to address those?
Great question. In fact, going back to that original speech that can everybody hear me? That way we can pass around the mic. Going back to that point I made where people were not being responsive to their district over the last 10 years. When I was in the assembly, every time I came back to my district, small business folks would always talk about workers' comp, workers' comp, workers' comp, we need reform workers' comp. And every time I went back to the legislature, I got nothing. And I was like, you're not talking to the same people I'm talking to because this is a really difficult situation. And that was around the time when we had the recall going. And then if you remember, Arnold Schwarzenegger came in on the recall and said we're going to have this workers' comp reform. It was being stopped in the legislature to say no. John Burton specifically said no, we're not doing anything regarding workers' comp. But then Arnold did something that I thought was very tactically smart. He said, okay, if you're not going to do anything, we're going to go to the people directly, and I'm going to raise money to do this initiative to do real workers' comp reform. So at that point, John Burton didn't want to leave it to just Schwarzenegger's drafting of the bill or the initiative because he felt that that initiative would pass. So they went and negotiated a workers' comp reform package that got done. And actually, I would have done it differently. I voted for the workers' comp reform, but one of the first things at the table was no court reform. Zero. And I believe, personally, that if we're going to do workers' comp reform, there absolutely has to be some court reform in California in the system. But that was not on the table. So we got that done, and we did some meaningful reforms in terms of workers' comp. Workers' comp dropped dramatically. Now, over the last 8 years since then, there's always new bills that kind of put some of those reforms back into place, and now workers' comp is starting to move up again. And so I think it's time that we move forward on another comprehensive workers' comp program, because you're absolutely right. A lot of business employers are looking at regulation of local tax, but they're also part of that regulation is workers' comp. And the bottom line is they look at the workers' comp living costs in Arizona or Nevada or Oregon. It's a lot more attractive in those states. Although we do have beautiful weather, at the end of the day, all these things add up, and that's why a lot of folks are picking up their jobs and moving, and small business folks are having a very tough time making costs, making their payroll to the bottom line, specifically also in this economy. So we have to meet with workers' comp. Any other questions?
I'm a small businessman in Oxnard. I employ about 30 people. California's got a high income tax rate on individuals. I personally believe in the state of California that if the rate of tax is too high, what is California going to do to make sure that people like you don't leave?
Well, I happen to believe that the California legislature has been the economic development agencies for states like Texas and Florida. You look, for example, my brother worked for Fidelity. Their national headquarters was in Santa Barbara, and they picked up those thousands of high-paying jobs, and they moved to Jacksonville, Florida, because they looked at the bottom line and the tax structure, and also cutting red tape. Another gentleman, Andy Pusner, who's the CEO of Carl's Jr. Hardee's, and I've heard of that company. He's now being called very frequently from Governor Perry of Texas, saying, what do we need to do to move your jobs, be proactive, move your jobs back to Dallas, Texas, and they're being very aggressive. So Jeff Burrell and I actually brought Andy Pusner up to Sacramento to talk with Gavin Newsom and others in a bipartisan way to talk about the bottom line of some of those reforms that we need to get done. And I think one of the biggest problems we have is we have elected officials and the governor who are not being proactive. These folks are not making their decisions like that. So we need to be proactive, and I know the city of Camarillo is very proactive at saying, what do you need as a local business to make sure you stay? We need more and more elected officials to come together and work at all levels of government to do this. One that I'm very proud that I'm carrying in this legislature. It is called the Bureaucracy Realignment Closure Commission. And what it does is put together a bipartisan panel together to talk about duplication in state agencies. And one biggest example I can bring forward is I have a grower up in the northern part of Santa Barbara that I went on this tour with, Cheshire Farms. They're a large broccoli grower. I think probably one of the largest broccoli growers in the world. And he brought me in after the tour, and he set me down in his office. He brought out 2 pieces of paper. And he said, on one sheet of paper, he said, one state agency said I had to recycle all of my water. And another state agency came out and said, I can't recycle any of my water. And he goes, Senator, I'm happy to do what you want to do, but I can't recycle all of it and none of it at the same time. And that's happening a lot. We have duplication in these state agencies. They're giving conflicting advice, but people just want to follow the rules. And what I would like to do is come together with this commission for the sole purpose, by the way, they don't get paid. Sole purpose is to come forward like they did in Iraq to say consolidation. We have a Department of Education under the governor and a directly elected superintendent of schools. 2 huge bureaucracies that I think can streamline. And, you know, everybody's frustrated because 50 cents of every dollar that we spend is in education, but clearly that money's not going to pass on the kids. We also have a department, we also have a board of equalization and a franchise tax board. You don't need multiple agencies, and here's a way that we can save resources and money and be more effective. Jeff, as well as I, get a lot of calls in our office from frustrated constituents that are getting the runaround from one state agency to the next agency to the next agency, then they get referred back to the original one they called, then they call our office and say, we need your help. And a large portion of our staff time is spent helping our constituents go through that bureaucratic process together. And we need to do something. And Jared Brown is asking for big, bold ideas. I think this is one of the ideas that I think is positive and should be supported on both sides of the aisle and get done. And I'm proud to say that bill did get through the first committee and it's moving forward today.
Yeah, Dennis Geiser, was it 750 new bill laws that you guys came out with?
I forgot the specific amount, but it's a lot.
How is it that they were able to do that and not balance the budget?
Well, I think one of the biggest problems that we have in Sacramento is there's not enough oversight, and people don't look at things from a macro point of view as much as they should, and they don't measure bills that are passed and passed. You know, I think a lot of legislators I serve with measure their success on how many bills, the number of bills that they did pass in law. You heard it, we come back to you. I passed 21 bills, and you know, are those all 21 bills that are needed? And I have a reform that I work with Senator Wyland that I think is a great reform moving forward. That we have a 2-year budget that you do 1 year, we have a 2-year legislative cycle. 1 year, you do nothing but the budget. And the next year you do legislation. Now, that first year you do the budget, obviously we do emergency legislation in case there's mudslides or earthquakes, any emergency legislation we do in that first year. But I think a lot of times my colleagues introduce bills, just introduce bills because they're up there Monday through Thursday from January through September. And they look at ways, they'll read the paper and they say, oh, there ought to be a law, and they pass a law. Or to show their constituents, look at all the hard work we're doing. I would rather them spend that time overseeing the budget and make sure they maximize the dollars that you do send to Sacramento. Hard-working individuals, small business people who are sending money to Sacramento, we owe it to our constituents and all the small businesses to make sure we stretch those dollars. And there's not enough oversight. I think there should be more focus doing that. And if we do that reform and we do 1 year oversight of the budget, then legislators can come back to their district and stop and brag about how they made their budget more efficient. And what does that mean for local government? Local government every year has to come up to Sacramento and fight for every dollar that's yours every single year, and you do that every year. Now you can project your local government budget because you know it's a 2-year set budget. And then another year of legislation, so you cut the new regulations in half, the budget, and then my guess is only the best bills will be introduced if you only have one legislative session to do it. I think that's reform that about the time it's come. And you know, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. A lot of these reforms don't happen in good times. In tough economic times, we have an opportunity to get a lot of meaningful reforms to move forward, to make a positive difference moving forward, to make sure we don't get back in this situation again. We're going to turn around this economy. I believe we're going to turn things around as we always do as Californians. But we have to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes. The definition of insanity, as by Albert Einstein, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Senator Strickland is short on time, and so I really thank you for the opportunity to hear from you. Thank you very much. And while he's leaving, I just want to go ahead and thank him also for emphasizing writing the letters to the governor, to your elected officials, to your local chamber of commerce. I'll just go ahead and tell him while he's exiting. I had the opportunity to be with a client up in Sacramento on an important issue that affected businesses on a statewide level, not with the chamber. And we had a few meetings set up with some senators and assemblymen up there. And I didn't have an appointment set up with Senator Strickland, but I stopped by his office, and he welcomed me, and his staff welcomed me, and was able to help us out. So I want to just emphasize again, if you have an issue